Hi there, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to start with a square card base today, which is a 5x5 110 pound Nina Solar white card base. And I am going to start off with a couple of square dies. Now I have a stacking square die set and I've just chosen two that are right beside each other in the set, and I'm going to create a window on the front of my card. I want to have a really nice acetate see-through window for this card today, so I kind of fiddle with placement a little bit and then I think about the design that I want to have on the front, and I know that I need to have the square shifted over to the right but still roughly centered vertically. Now I have just eyeballed this. You could definitely measure, of course. I'm going to open up my card base and run it through my die cutting machine just so that I'm only cutting the top layer of my card. Then I'm going to use a little bit of the low-tack tape to tape both of those squares together that I had at the beginning. Now you could do this with any shape at all, it doesn't have to be squares. And I'm going to cut that out of a piece of white cardstock, it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to cut that out 4 times so that I have 4 of those frames. So I'm going to skip through that, and then all I'm going to do is glue these together. And I just use some nice strong liquid glue. There's definitely some really fine double-sided tapes out there that would work for this nice and easily. So if liquid glue is not your thing, then that's an option as well. But I have glued all of these together to create a nice skinny thick frame. So I'm going to pop that aside to dry completely whilst I work on a couple of other bits and pieces, but you can see that this is going to fit nicely around the square that we die cut through earlier. So now I am coming on to the kind of decorations part, and I have this stamp set here which is called Peony Bloom, and again I've used this lots of times before, but it is one of my favorites. I have not really used this smaller flower much, so I'm going to add a little bit of my anti-static powder bag there, which is a really important step to do before you heat emboss anything. I'm using some VersaFine Onyx black ink to stamp it out 4 times, and then I'm going to add on some clear embossing powder. This one happens to be from Ranger, but any clear embossing powder will work perfectly fine. And the reason that I like adding embossing powder is so that when I'm colouring, it makes it much easier to stay within the lines, and even if you're not watercolouring, I find it makes it a lot easier. But I will be using some Oxides to colour these today. I'm going to melt this with my heat gun, and you'll know that all the powder is melted when it's become nice and shiny and it's got a tiny little raised edge to it. I'm going to be using some Spiced Marmalade, Wilted Violet and Mustard Seed today. I kind of wanted to go for the purples, oranges and yellows today, and you could use multiple colours, you know, like a light and a dark of each one. And this is my non-skills in colouring, guys. So I am originally going over with a little light layer. First of all, this is the easiest way that I have found. I am using a water brush, but you could definitely just use a paintbrush. I have a little cloth over to the right hand side of me just to get rid of any extra colour or water that I don't need in my brush. And then you'll see that my colouring gets faster and faster, and I just add a really plain basic layer of the colour. And by the last one here, I really just scribble the colour on. So there is no technique and no skill. I scribble the colour on and make there a nice light layer. And then I give them a quick dry with my heat gun so that I can layer up the oxide inks. And then this is where I kind of start doing a little bit of extra colouring. Now all I'm going to do is kind of add some flicks in and a little bit on each petal. So I'm going to zoom in just a second here so that you can see it. Again, there is so little skill involved. This is not my forte and I'm not good at it, but I do enough to kind of get by. And you can see I'm just adding flicks kind of here, there and everywhere, and I like how they turned out and I think they look okay. So you don't have to be good at colouring and things to add flowers or any of those things onto your cards. Don't be afraid to give it a go. But anyway, I used to prefer to skip through all of the colouring on my videos, but I have grown to be able to show you guys a little bit of it. But yeah, very, very basic. But anyway, in saying that, you could definitely use any medium. You could use colouring in pencils, you could use alcohol markers, you can use watercolour paints, just anything to get these flowers nice and coloured. And this is where I'm also going to bring in a little bit of mowed lawn, and this will be the green for the leaves. Again, you could use a couple of different colours of green and layer it up and things. But all I'm going to do is get some colour off my block and add it kind of underneath the flower where it would be darkest. It would have the most shadow from the flower, and then drag it out a little bit with my water brush pen so that it is lighter towards the tips. But that is what I'm doing anyway. And just on a side note, I kind of pulled out the stamp set again this morning and kind of really got inspired when I looked at it. So I've made a few cards using this stamp set. I will link to everything down below in the description box in case you're interested, but I suggest that if you have a look in your stash, I bet you would find a flower stamp that you could use. I'm going to be using this leaf die here to create and cut out 3 in some white cardstock. However, I'm going to colour them with some shabby shutters Distress Oxide ink. And again, if you have a pattern paper or a coloured paper that is the right colour for you, then just go ahead and use that. But I didn't have the right one that I wanted to go with my project today. And I just find it easiest to press it down onto an acrylic block, the ink pad, or if you have the Reinker, just squeeze a little bit out onto an acrylic block. However, a non-stick mat or something non-stick, a piece of plastic, would work fantastic as well. And I am just getting that colour on there. I am just making sure that these leaves are pretty covered. Not too worried if there's a little bit of white showing and things, but covered pretty much. So that's the leaves done. Then we're going to move on again, and this is the part where I want to put together the card. So we have the card base that we started with here, and I have a 4 3/4 inch square piece of cardstock as well. And this was kind of an afterthought, so I need to cut the square in exactly the same place that it is on the front of my card. So on the inside of my card, I'm going to tape this piece of paper in place, so leaving the perfect border around the outside, just as I would want it to go on the front. I'll use the same square die here and tack it straight through my card front. So because there's nothing to cut on my card front, it'll go straight through to that piece of paper behind, and now I have it in exactly the right spot for when I need to put it on my card base. So that's just one way that you can kind of line everything up if you have a bit of an afterthought. And you can see it lines up perfectly there on the front, and the border around the outside is nice and even as well. Now the reason I did this piece is because I want to emboss it with an embossing folder. This one is from We Are Memory Keepers. Again, I'm not even sure if this is available anymore, but any embossing folder will do the trick here. This is sort of a large basket weave sort of pattern, I would say. But anyway, I've run it through my machine, and then that will go on the front. Now, I don't think there are dies for these. I definitely don't have them anyway, so I'm going to do a little bit of fussy cutting. And I have lost my smallest Tim Holtz fussy cutting scissors, so these are my backup ones, which are the Cutterbee scissors from EK Success, and they work perfectly fine. In fact, they have a very nice fine detailed tip to them, so it made it really easy. I am cutting off the kind of stalk stem of these flowers, but one tip here, if you have a black outline on your embossing, once you have fussy cut something out, especially if you've done it right up next to the line, take any sort of black marker and from the back of the image, go around the outside, and that will hide all of your little fussy cutting mistakes. It is definitely worth spending the time doing that. And then I have cut out all 4 of those gorgeous little flowers. Now, as I said, time to put the card together. So I need a piece of acetate to create my acetate window, of course. And I just used the largest square that I did to create the frame, the same 2 squares that I started with in the beginning. I added some double-sided tape to the back of that little square frame that we made, because I find that double-sided tape is what is the quickest and easiest to hold acetate. And then I have added another bit of double-sided tape to the back of that frame again on the other side of the acetate. You'll see it in a second and it will all make sense. I'm adding some liquid glue onto my emboss panel because it is time to just put everything together. So this will match up nicely but leave a little border around the outside of the card. Because this is an embossed piece of card, you might need to turn it over and hold it for a few seconds so that it gives the glue a minute to set up. I had put that double-sided tape there on the back of everything, and I'm going to pop that right over my little square window so everything is the same size because I used the same square die, so it matches up really nice and evenly. And there I have my little acetate window starting to take shape. So I want to put on all of this foliage and the flowers that we went ahead and created for this project. So I'm just going to kind of stack these up a little bit. Now, I'm not too worried how they end up stacking and looking in which direction, because I know that the flowers are going to cover up a lot of those sort of stems and things. So it's really only the sides of the foliage that I'm too worried about. So again, I'm using some liquid glue, but you could use some glue dots and hide them behind things. Just whatever works for you. Even some double-sided tape would work fine because a lot of this is going to be hidden behind the flowers. So just whatever adhesive you find easiest. Now, as I've said before in previous videos, if you are following along and you are not using the exact foliage that I have here, don't be afraid to cut it, cut some leaves off, make it work so that it works for you and your project, because that is what I do often. I love reusing the same dies and stamps, and I just change them to suit whatever my project is. So here I felt like there was a little too much green foliage and I just needed the flowers more than the leaves, down the bottom. So I've cut a few off. I think I ended up cutting it off both of the purple ones because it's just not needed. I added a couple of little foam squares on these just because I felt it gave a really nice height, and it kind of evened it up with the height of the frame because I used 4 little pieces of white cardstock to create the square frame around the window. So I've placed them all ready to go, and I always just place them down nice and lightly so that I can keep rearranging them until I've got them in place. Here in the middle, using a really lightweight piece of cardstock, I have added the same 4 1/4 square little flap here, because obviously with an acetate window you are going to be able to see through it. And I don't want to see through to what someone has partially written on the inside, so that's why I've added that little insert in the middle, and that is what I'm going to stamp onto. Now I'm just going to use the happy birthday one because I know where this card is off to today, and I'm just stamping with some VersaFine Onyx black ink. I am using a stamping platform because at this point I super don't want to ruin it. This is from the Kelly Create stamp set, which is a super affordable stamp set. These are a really good price point, and I have found them fantastic. I have quite a few of them. They are an acrylic stamp set, and I believe that they are actually meant for learning how to write script and things over top of them, but these are perfect for stamping for me. But anyhow, in the middle of this card, I'm going to stamp another sentiment that is going to say, celebrate your day. So this comes out of 2 different stamp sets actually, and it is going to be stamped in some VersaFine Clear Monarch color, a nice purple color, which is a similar color to the purple that is on the front, the Wilted Violet and the Distress Oxide color. I chose to stamp in a purple pigment ink because the oxides are not fantastic for stamping. They're not bad and you can make it look fine, perfectly fine, but I definitely get a much better image when I use this purple pigment ink. And that is my acetate window card for today. I will make a custom envelope using the 123 punch board from We Are Memory Keepers, and I'll be good to go. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you guys love this card, and I really look forward to seeing you in the next video. Have a good day. Thanks. Bye.